Magic Tea House, Book number 48, A Merlin Mission, A Perfect Time for Pandas, by Mary Pope Osborne. Chapter 7, Jack the Giant. Jack felt as if someone was gripping his head and pulling him up and up and up. He looked down and watched his arms and hands stretch out. His legs grew longer, his feet bigger. Jack rocked back and forth, then stood still. He had stopped stretching and growing. His shoes, clothes, and backpack had all grown bigger to fit his new body. "Jack!" Annie's voice sounded distant. Peering through the dust, Jack looked around for Annie. "Jack, down here!" Jack looked down. Annie was standing next to him. She only came up to his knees. "I dropped the bottle and it broke," she said. "I didn't get to drink the potion." "Oh no," Jack boomed. Even his voice was bigger. "I'm so sorry." "You're huge," said Annie. "How does it feel? Is it fun?" "Not yet," said Jack. The earth trembled again with another aftershock. Annie lost her balance and fell. Jack leaned over and picked her up with both hands. He placed her on one of his giant shoulders. "Whoa," said Annie. "This is cool. Now I'm taller than you. I can be your lookout." From their new height, Jack and Annie could see over the rubble to the vast devastation. Trees down in the valley had been uprooted. The river was wild and raging. The mountain tops were shrouded in dark clouds. "It's starting to rain again," said Annie. "That's the least of our problems," said Jack. "I just hope the earthquake didn't destroy the Panda Center." "I know. Let's hurry. We only have an hour," said Annie. Annie held on to Jack's head, and Jack held on to Annie's legs. He lifted one giant foot and stepped over the boulder that had crushed their bikes. Picking his way through the rubble, he headed back to the Panda Center. He stepped over fallen debris, power lines, and deep cracks in the road. His enormous sneakers crushed twigs and brush. Jack stepped over huge mounds of mud as if they were anthills. He kicked away boulders as if they were soccer balls. He tossed aside fallen trees as if they were broken branches. He leapt over a river of water coursing down from the mountain as if it were a rain puddle. "This is incredible," said Jack. "Watch out," said Annie. A boulder was rolling down the wet road toward them. Jack spread his legs wide, and the boulder went between them and kept rolling downhill. Jack and Annie laughed. "Now are you having fun?" she said. Jack nodded. "Maybe a little bit." Suddenly a tree crashed across the road. Jack stumbled over it. He fell to the ground just as a wall of mud came cascading down the mountain slope. The black ooze was filled with rock fragments and plants. "Annie," thought Jack. He lifted his head out of the mud before it smothered him. He reached around and felt Annie's kicking feet. He pulled her out of the thick, wet goo. "You okay?" Jack shouted. "Yes," sputtered Annie. "But we're sliding over the cliff." Annie was right. With the force of a tidal wave, the mudslide was pushing them across the highway toward the cliff. Jack clutched Annie under one of his huge arms. Then he struggled through the grimy ooze until they were clear of the mudslide. Covered with mud from his hair to his shoes, Jack felt heavy and uncomfortable. He even had mud in his mouth. He put Annie down and sat on the road. "At least we're safe," Annie said. Jack coughed, gagging on mud. "You look like a giant swamp monster," Annie said. Jack couldn't talk. As the rain fell harder, he threw back his head and let rainwater wash his face and fill his mouth. He choked and spit and coughed until his throat was clear. With help from the pelting rain, he washed the mud off his bare arms and his shirt, jeans, and sneakers. Finally, he looked at Annie. "How long do you think I've been a giant now?" he asked hoarsely. "I don't know," she said. "It seems like a long time. We'd better get moving. We only have an hour," he said. "What'll we do if you're still a giant when we get to the center?" asked Annie. "I'll hide outside," said Jack, "until I'm small again." He figured the last thing the staff needed now was to see a 25-foot tall kid. Slowly, they both stood up, soaking wet, but cleaner. Jack lifted Annie back onto his shoulder. He began striding uphill again, sloshing through mud puddles and stepping over crushed rocks. Jack walked through the falling rain, never stopping. But by the time they reached the Panda Center, he was so tired he could barely take another step. With Annie on his shoulder, Jack stood on the bank of the river, and they stared across at the damage wrought by the earthquake. The parking lot was filled with mud. The center's sign had been knocked down. Portions of the bridge had collapsed into the river, and fallen brush and debris were piled up on the other side of the entrance gate. The slopes that surrounded the center were now gray and bare. Landslides had stripped them of foliage. "If it's this bad outside the center," said Jack, "I wonder how bad it is inside." "How do we even get inside?" said Annie, staring down at the raging river. "Don't worry," said Jack. "I'm pretty sure I'm tall enough to wade across." He took a deep breath, then stepped into the river. The cold water swirled around his waist. The current nearly knocked him over. Slowly and carefully, he stepped around a huge rock that had rolled into the river. Suddenly, Jack felt his body start to quake. Another aftershock, he thought. He paused, but his body kept shaking. As Jack shook, he started to grow smaller. In an instant, he had shrunk back to his normal size. He and Annie plunged into the swiftly turning water. Jack grabbed the branch of a fallen tree. Clinging to the branch, he looked around frantically for Annie. She was holding on to a log. "Here!" shrieked Jack. He reached out his hand, and Annie grabbed it. As the water swirled around them, he pulled her over to him. "Can we get to the bridge?" Annie cried. "Try!" yelled Jack. They both let go of the branch and thrashed through the water until they grabbed onto a piece of the wrecked bridge. Jack and Annie hoisted themselves up onto the slab of concrete. Jack pointed to the part of the bridge that still stood at the edge of the ravine. He took another deep breath and leapt over the gap onto the broken bridge. Annie followed. Jack and Annie clung to a piece of the bridge railing and stared at the entrance gate of the Panda Center. Muddy rocks, branches, and leaves were piled on the other side. "I think we can climb over," said Annie. She led the way, stepping onto the railing next to the gate. Jack followed her. They climbed over the gate and kept climbing over the heap of branches, brush, and rocks that blocked the entrance. When they reached the top of the wreckage, they looked down. Staff members were rushing around with buckets, shovels, and first aid kits. When Master Lee and Dr. Ling caught sight of Jack and Danny, they both stopped dead in their tracks and gaped at them. "Hi there," Annie called. "Can we help?" Chapter 8. One Panda at a Time. "Yes, thank you. We need all the help we can get, said Dr. Ling. She looked dazed and frightened. Jack and Danny scrambled down from the wreckage. Where's your grandmother? Asked Dr. Ling. She's... Jack looked at Annie. Helping earthquake victims south of here, said Annie. Good for her, said Dr. Ling, sighing. Everyone needs help. This is a huge disaster for our region, said Master Lee. We have no water or electricity. We've been able to make calls on cell phones, but we must conserve the batteries. How's Bing Bing? Jack asked. She's missing, said Master Lee. His voice quavered. Missing? Said Jack. Yes, said Master Lee. I can't find her anywhere. Don't worry, we'll help you, said Annie. Master Lee's eyes welled with tears. Thank you, he said. She is like a member of my family. He took a deep breath, then spoke clearly and steadily. The pandas are terrified by the quake and the landslides. Many of their homes have been destroyed. The stone walls around their yards have collapsed. We also have staff who have been injured, said Dr. Ling. Master Lee and I must go now to help those who have been trapped in the rubble. While you do that, we'll look for Bing Bing, said Annie. Thank you, said Master Lee again. But be very careful. Remember, she's a wild animal. She might be so upset and confused that she could attack you by mistake. We'll remember. Come on, Jack, said Annie. Oh, wait, said Dr. Ling. So everyone will know you are here to help. Please put your volunteer clothes back on. She pointed to the bin. Then she and Master Lee hurried off. Jack and Annie grabbed their coveralls from the bin and pulled them on over their wet clothes. Let's check around Bing Bing's house first, said Jack. He and Annie ran across the grounds over shards of glass and fallen debris. They passed broken windows and cracked concrete walls. The kindergarten area was empty of cubs. The quake had overturned the swing sets and slide. When Jack and Annie arrived at Bing Bing's house, they saw that the stone wall enclosing her yard had crumbled. She must have run off into the woods, said Jack. We have to go look for her, said Annie. Jack and Annie climbed over the collapsed wall. Then they scrambled over piles of shrubs and branches into the forest. Bing Bing, Annie called. Bing Bing, Jack echoed. They kept moving through the broken brush until Jack stopped. He grabbed Annie. Shh, he said, and pointed. Bing Bing was sitting in the middle of a fallen bamboo grove. Her forepaws rested in her lap. Her head sagged on her chest, and her eyes were closed. The giant panda was snoring. She looks exhausted, said Jack. Annie smiled. She doesn't look like she's going to attack us, she said. Bing Bing raised her head. When she saw Jack and Annie, she let out a bellow. Don't be scared, Bing Bing, said Jack. He and Annie crept closer to the panda. They knelt down beside her. Hi there, said Annie. She gently patted the giant panda's furry head. Bing Bing made soft sounds. Are you hungry? Asked Jack. He picked up a broken bamboo stalk and offered it to the panda. She took the shoot in her paws and pulled off the leaves with her teeth. She gazed at Jack as she chewed. He thought she looked weary and sad. Listen, Annie whispered. Soft, whimpering sounds came from the trees beyond the thicket. Annie stood up and quietly stepped through the broken bamboo. Look, it's Roly and Polly, she said. Wait here, Jack said to Bing Bing. Keep eating. He hurried to Annie's side. High up in a tree were two small pandas. It's okay, said Jack, as if he were talking to little children. Come down now. one panda at a time. Come on, Rolly, Annie coaxed the nearest panda cub. Come to me. The small panda started down the tree trunk, rump first. When he got close to the ground, Annie put her arms around him and pried him loose from the tree. Rolly made little chirping sounds. I understand, Annie said to the cub. The earthquake was awful, wasn't it? You were so scared, but you're fine now. I've got you. You're next, Polly, said Jack. Come down. Polly hugged the trunk and used the soles of her feet to pull herself up even higher into the tree. Not up, called Jack. Down! As the little panda looked down at him, her hind paws slipped on the trunk. With a shriek, she tumbled to the ground. Jack dropped to his knees and put his arms around Polly. Don't worry, I've got you, he said, cuddling her. You're safe now. The panda nibbled Jack's arm with soft, tiny bites. Jack laughed. That tickles, he said. We have to get them back to the center, said Annie. Jack stood up and lifted Polly into his arms. The cub was surprisingly heavy. Come with us, Bing Bing, he called to the giant panda. She was still chewing her bamboo stem. Lead us back to Master Lee, Bing Bing, said Annie. He misses you. Bing Bing licked her paws. She stood on all fours and shook herself like a dog. Then she started toward the panda center with her rolling gait. Jack and Annie carried the cubs through the brush until more whimpering panda sounds made them stop. Wait, Bing Bing, called Jack. Look, said Annie. A third cub, smaller than the other two, was peeking out from behind an old tree stump. Hi there, said Jack. The cub rushed toward Jack, yipping like a puppy. He clasped Jack's legs and held on tightly. Clutching Polly gently under his right arm, Jack bent down and put his left arm around the little panda. The frightened cub was shivering. Poor little guy, said Jack. Can you carry little guy too? Asked Annie. I'll try, said Jack. He clumsily scooped little guy off the ground. Got him? Said Annie. Yep. Jack felt as if he were carrying two chubby little kids, except these kids' fur and paws. All set, he said. Let's go, gang. Jack held on tightly to little Guy and Polly. Annie carried Rolly in her arms. Bing Bing trotted ahead over the fallen rocks and crushed bamboo. They all climbed over the ruins of the collapsed wall. Master Lee was standing in Bing Bing's yard. When he saw the panda, his face lit up. Bing! He cried, and raced across the yard toward her. Bing Bing sat on her back legs, and Master Lee grabbed her forepaws. Oh, Bing, you're not hurt one bit, are you? He said. He hugged the giant panda and laughed. Bing Bing made snorting noises that sounded like laughter too. Dr. Ling came running into the yard. The missing cubs, she cried. Where did you find them? Hiding in the trees, said Annie. The cubs made screeching sounds as if they were trying to tell Dr. Ling about their terrifying adventure. Dr. Ling smiled. We'll take them to the nursery and give them milk to calm them down, she said. We're using a small generator to keep the incubator going for the newborn. Did you help everyone out of the rubble? Annie asked her. Yes, all the workers at the Panda Center are safe now, said Dr. Ling. Just bruised and shaken. We are very fortunate, for we have word that other workers in the nature reserve are harmed or missing. Let us go. Before he went with Dr. Ling, Jack looked back. He saw Master Lee dancing with Bing Bing, holding her paws and rocking from side to side. See you later, guys, Jack called. Then he followed Annie to the Panda Nursery. Inside, the tiny newborn panda was safe in her incubator. At least 10 small pandas were lying on their backs on a blanket on the floor. They were all drinking milk from baby bottles. "Aw, that's the cutest thing I've ever seen," cried Annie. Dr. Ling brought bottles for Roly, Polly, and Little Guy. The 3 cubs held their bottles with their 4 paws. "We put a little sedative in the milk to help them go to sleep," said Dr. Ling. As the cubs sucked on the bottles, a roaring sound filled the air. For a moment, Jack thought the noise was from another aftershock, but Dr. Ling smiled. "Ah, good," she said. "The helicopter has arrived.